Louise Welsh, everybody.
Hello. And Jenny Niven.
Let's get us seated. Hello, thank you so much, everybody, for coming out on such a beautiful evening. We will make sure that you made the right choice, but it is really lovely to see you all, and I believe that there's some folks joining us from home as well, which is really lovely. Louise, this is an absolute gift. It's so nice to be able to just have some time to sit down with you and catch up on all the amazing things that you've been doing, to talk about your new book, To the Dogs, and I think some of the sort of conversation prompts that the RSE, the sort of trails that they've left for us, is going to prove to be good, fruitful fodder for us this evening. So thanks so much for making
thank
time.
you. And I'm hoping we're going to talk a bit about book festivals too, and the importance of libraries, which we all love, and gateways to culture as well. How did we end up, and how did the audience as well, how did we end up being engaged with culture and thinking that it's an important thing, the visual arts, the written arts, and everything in between? Absolutely.
So for those of you that don't know me, my name's Jenny Niven. I'm the director of the Edinburgh International Book Festival. It's nice to see some audience members and friends of the festival here this evening. I've had the privilege of knowing Louise for a long time, and there was a sort of creative adventures thread in the blurb for this evening's event, and we've been on some quite good creative adventures, which we will probably get into. But Louise, you will probably know, is the author of 9 novels now. That's right, isn't it? Is this the 9th?
I think it might even be the 10th, but I'm working on a new one, so I think I keep on adding that, and it's not even finished.
But also short stories and libretta, and an enormous inspiration to a whole generation, actually, of Scottish writers who've come up through the University of Glasgow's creative writing programmes. She's internationally translated. I believe The Cutting Room, which came out in 2002, it won the best of the Saltire fiction winners, 30 years of the Saltire Prize, I bet, which gives you a really good sense of not just the kind of how well loved Louise's books are, but for how long they've been sort of part of the literary landscape and the story of literary Scotland, at least the entire time that I've been working in it. And it's really such an achievement. And I know so many writers whose work has been influenced by you, and the work that you've done, Louise, as you said a minute ago, about around opening doors to culture. I know that's something that you've been kind of really passionate about throughout everything that you've done.
Yeah, and I guess I feel if you manage to hang on, if you manage to keep on working and keep on making work, and we talk about monkeys with typewriters, and I think actually when I think about writers, I think we're all like these monkeys just trying to pull, and you try and pull other monkeys up with you as you crawl along these typewriter keys. And I guess like me, I came from a background where everybody read. We read, we went to the library, and this was hugely, hugely, hugely important. We didn't go to opera or the theatre very often. We had the television, and I was thinking I went to see Scottish Opera's La Traviata the other night, and it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And I was thinking, when did I first see La Traviata? And I know exactly where I first saw it. I saw it on Channel 4. I think when I was probably dogging school. It was very sad to go and watch.
That's a rebellion, isn't it?
I taped it and then watched it later. But how did doors get open to things like opera, and the importance of things like Channel 4 in my life? Huge, 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 huge. And that idea that you might enjoy this thing, this high art, and that might become part of your life, the life-enhancing element within your life. So, yeah.
I'd like to dive into To the Dogs because it's just launched. But actually, given that we are kind of talking about creative journeys, can you just highlight, as you say there, Louise, that is obviously a kind of foundational one, the first time that you've seen an opera, but what were some of the other very early doors to kind of bits and pieces of culture or particular books or things that just planted the seed right at the beginning that this is maybe the life for me? Sort of thing?
Yeah, well, definitely the library, the free books, getting an adult ticket as a young child, because my dad was like, we can police, it's fine. And then they didn't police at all and just read whatever you wanted. That you know, I have a visceral memory of thinking, what will happen when I've read all the books in the library? How will I manage? So that, and I guess being read to as well, you know, Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. Oh, I still go back to that book, you know, the imaginative life that gave you. And then being, when I was older, because I was brought up in Edinburgh, getting on the bus and coming into the centre of the city and going to places that I'd probably been taken as a child, so I knew that they existed. So going to the Fruit Market Gallery, which I just loved and still love, and seeing, things that blew your mind. You had no idea what you were looking at, but it made, somehow it excited you. Chambers Street, you know, the National Museum of Scotland, which is still a place that I go to and find inspiration in. And I think still in these days, they were run by, you know, the custodians would be elderly men who'd fought in the Second World War and really told you to shift yourself, you know. It wasn't always the warm welcome that we get nowadays. National Portrait Gallery, all of these places that you can go in for free, that the doors are open, and if you're able to walk through them, something awaits you there, you know. And I think that's part of what we need to fight to keep open and keep those doors wide, you know, in terms of, we were very sad this year that the I Write Literary Festival, you know, I think a very small number of events are going ahead, but really with the I Write Festival not being on through lack of funding, the Children's Festival is not on. So the We Write, and you think there's this moment when you can get children into libraries, into, you know, and to see this, the books, to see living authors, and to bring them to that space which belongs to them. It belongs to us. So there's, you feel this huge frustration that wasn't considered, you know, worthy of the funding, the small amount of extra funding, the gap there, and there will be children that don't walk through that space. And, you know, that moment is lost. Maybe some of them will find it by themselves. And I also feel that the children bring the parents as well, you know, because they're the places parents will go to support their children, but they might not go for themselves, and there's something waiting for them there too. So, so in terms of the university, the work we do there, part of that is still, because universities, of course, are, in a sense, elitist, aren't they? You know, you can only go if you've got this qualification or that qualification. The campus that we have in Glasgow, it's an open campus. Anybody can walk across it, and that's also true of the new buildings. There's new sight lines that have opened up. And during the semester, every Monday, 1 o'clock, we have an event within the chapel, which is welcome to everybody. You can bring your baby. You can bring, you know, anybody can come. You're not allowed to bring your dogs, which I think is a shame, but they can wait outside. So yeah, it's just anybody can come, and hopefully they do. I mean, it's also online. It's been going for 6 years, and we've been online from the beginning. So you can watch creative conversations, as they're called. But just that idea that this belongs to all of us, and we should all feel free to come in and partake.
Speaking of the university, your new book, To the Dogs, is set in the university, isn't it? Can you give us a bit of a sort of just an introduction to the book and what the world of To the Dogs is?
Yeah, so I'm hugely honoured to work at the University of Glasgow. I'm a professor there in creative writing. I'm two days a week, which I think is the perfect amount for a writer, you know. And also, if I did 3 days, then they'd make me convene something. And that would be a disaster. That would really be a disaster, because I'm not very good with spreadsheets and numbers, and I'd get in a real fankle and everything would fall apart. So 2 days is very good for me. And I love campus novels. When I did my inaugural lecture, I did it on campus novels. So I think they're a very good sort of they talk a lot about the world, don't they, and what's going on. You know, Malcolm Bradbury's The History Man seems to really show how awful and horrible it must have been in the 1970s in a lot of red brick universities. And it would be fantastic as well. You know, there's an energy within that book. Philip Roth's The Human Stain. You know, that's saying something else, isn't it? Mammoth's Plays. So To the Dogs is a crime fiction novel set in a Central Belt university, which bears some resemblance to Edinburgh, some to Glasgow. It's got a tower, but I put a clock on the tower in the hope that it would throw people off the scent. And it's loosely inspired by C.P. Snow's The Masters, which is a fantastic novel, if any of you know this novel. And in C.P. Snow's The Masters, at Cambridge College, the master himself is sadly dying, and science and art are having a fight about who's going to be the next master. And at the same time, they're trying to get money for a fantastic building, because universities since the beginning of time have always been entranced by fantastic buildings. They call it edifice complex within the book. So, but what we know, you know, so this is written post-war, but it's set in the period just prior to the Second World War. So there's also discussions about fascism, and some people are really for it. You know, they're like, this is fantastic. Fantastic what Hitler's doing in Germany. And other people are against it. They're like, this is awful. This is a real... but what we know, of course, as we read this novel and we see the academics fighting, is that many of the students who are crossing the quads in a few years' time will, some of them will be dead, and some of the rest will have gone through horrendous experiences. So we've got this juxtaposition in the reader's foreknowledge as well. So this book is perhaps not as well crafted as that. This is a crime novel, and I wanted to think of it as an exercise in dread. I wanted the reader to know, you know, that something bad is going to happen, and I wanted them to be a part of this world and not really know who is the awful thing going to happen to and when will it happen. And at the centre is...
Can I just stop you there, though, Louise? Why would you do that to your reader? What is that impulse?
Partly because I love the novels of Ruth Rendell.
Right.
And I think Ruth Rendell is great in this exercise in dread. She sets up a fantastic world, and we invest in the world, but we know because of where the book is on the shelf and what the cover of the book is like, and because of her back catalogue, we know something bad is going to happen, and so we wait for it, and we wait for it with sort of an uneasy pleasure, don't we? Yeah. You know, there's some kind of catharsis awaiting. Yeah, so at the centre is a guy called Jim Brennan. He's a professor. He comes from a working class background. His father was a low-level enforcer, so a not very successful gangster, what they would call a hard man, you know, very, very violent. And Jim has managed to move from this background into the university, where he is possibly going to be the man at the top of the tower. He may be the next principal. But before he can do that, he's got everything. And it's interesting for me to write somebody who doesn't have an economic imperative. You know, he has a beautiful house. He drives an Audi, and his wife drives a Range Rover. His wife is an architect. They've got two lovely children, Sasha, who's 11, and Elliot, who's just about, you know, in his early 20s. And Elliot, unfortunately, is rather entranced by the idea of the gangster life. And Elliot gets caught for drug dealing, and it all begins to unravel a little bit. And I suppose part of the question is, what will Jim do for the people that he loves? And this idea of jeopardy entering the house, yeah, and entering the rather beautiful architect-designed middle-class space, and everything that he's built.
The tension, I think, between sort of the legacy of the dad and so Jim Brennan's father, the hard man in the background, and how he infuses the character. I think it's so fascinating because you've got this total tension between the sort of, you know, the presentation of Jim Brennan to his university colleagues, and he's obviously quite ruthless in his ambition. But there's another sort of ruthlessness that's going on in the background where it's all, he's proving that he's not like his father, and then somehow just is exactly like his father in a strange way, and then how that plays out in his own relationship with his son. So you're thinking constantly about the apple and the tree, aren't you? So how did you kind of, when you were conceiving of that's my reading of it anyway, it might, you might all think something different, but when you were thinking about that, the kind of 3 generations of men, what were you thinking about in terms of the relationships and the cycles and the family inheritance?
Yeah, just really exploring that, and I guess the idea of the Jim being within this middle class space and how secure is he? You know, he doesn't have a safety net. He doesn't have the backup. His backup really is his wife, who you know, they're really solid relationship, and she's a little bit ahead of him in those social things. You know, and he just thinks she's amazing. You know, she's got amazing taste. She, you know, all of this stuff. But I guess the things that make Jim able to operate in the gangster world, it turns out he's rather effective because he is rather ruthless. Also enable him within the academic world, and it's obviously, it's a crime novel, but also I hope it's got a lot of humour in it as well. So that idea, you know, there's a farcical element to it, I suppose, and I'm interested in that combination within the crime genre of extreme social realism, which is also combined with absurdity, because I think there's something always absurd about the crime novel or the crime genre, and I love people like Chester Himes. I think takes that to the furthest degree. He really the politics of offence, as I think of it with Chester Himes. So there's a lot of fun to be had with that, and balancing. I don't know, if you're having violence, you have to also have this lighter touch as well to make it all tolerable. And thinking about other things to do with universities, with funding, with what would you call it, sort of academic washing. You know, Jim is not above taking money from wherever he thinks they could get money for these new buildings. He thinks some of his colleagues are rather naive, some of the principles that they have. And then there's also a plot involving China and involving connections with universities there as well. And yeah, so there's a lot going on.
There is, yeah.
within the text, and a lot of fun, hopefully, to be had as well.
You've described the sort of psychological thriller and crime genre as a useful political tool. How would you say that sort of plays out in this novel?
Yeah, when I think of it as a political tool, I guess ultimately something like a crime novel has to be entertaining. It has to be absorbing and hopefully transporting. You know, I think these are novels that do have strong plot lines, that do engage with jeopardy and other enjoyable things. But perhaps it's to do with the idea of social realism that I mentioned as well. If you're describing society, there will necessarily be a political aspect to it, I think. Jim is a guy who walked through, who doors opened for him through hard work and intelligence. You know, really, he's a real grafter. He's a grafter, not a grifter. And there's a big difference, isn't there? So he's somebody that's grafted really hard. He's got to where he's got. And he's also closing the doors behind him. You know, he's not doing that thing of pulling somebody up with him. He's shutting those doors. So Jim is the guy who's like, yeah, you know what? I think we should close all the halls of residence. Let's do that. And he's the guy that's not really thinking about how do we get the next generation of people that are rather like him. How do you support that? And I think those are choices that we have. Jim is someone that's he can read a spreadsheet. My God, he can read a spreadsheet upside down, you know. But it's also, he's not a horrible person.
Yeah.
You know, and I think this is something else.
Yeah, it's really well done that he's actually very likeable, even though there's all that.
Yeah. And, you know, this is what we find in the world of work and within sort of life as well, that we have conversations with people that we disagree with. And nevertheless, we can get on and we can disagree and have, you know, hard conversations, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. And, you know, I felt a little bit like that with Jim as well.
I think part of the kind of political aspect of it is in that as well, though, this whole social mobility question, like how far, you know, where he's come from and where he's going, and then what happens with the son. And it seems to me that some of the frustration directed at the son is like, I've done all this, I've laid it all out for you, but here you are going straight back into, and maybe the son not really realising the consequences because he's had that slight cotton wooling of the middle class academic family. That, but actually, once you're in prison, you're in prison. That is not going to protect you, and his kind of frustrations around that as well. And I felt, I don't want to give any spoilers, but I felt quite sorry for the daughter, the 11-year-old one who's sort of cocooned and there's no idea of any of this in front of her. And I want to know what she does with all of that mixed up background.
Yeah. It was sort of fun to write family life and to have an element of the domestic world within that, which makes everything much more jeopardous, because Jim and his wife are people that have something to lose, and it's not just money that they have to lose. You know, they've got a family who they love, and that is hugely important. So that sort of ups the jeopardy as well, really. And I guess it's something, even if you don't, I don't have children, but we've all got people that we care about, and that idea that how far would you go? What would you do? You know, so it was very, very good fun to write.
And fun to read enormously.
Yeah, and also I guess thinking about architecture, that built environment, and because I love the new buildings at Glasgow. You know, when we saw them going up, you were rather like, gosh, you know, this looks like a lot of money. I love them. I love them. I love the disabled access. I love that people can get in, because the building that I work in, which I also really like, you know, but my office is at the top of a very precipitous staircase, you know, 3 floors up. Sometimes I have to arrange to meet people elsewhere because they're not going to be able to make those stairs. And I think these buildings, the new ones that people can walk through, there's a cafe that anybody can use. You can walk in, there's the glass sides, you know, that you can see in. So you can see it's not scary. And again, that idea that it belongs to everybody. And okay, you're not going to get to go up to the, you know, unless you make an arrangement or something. Yeah. But this is part of the city, and this is, you know, the citizens can go in.
That's one of the great things, if I might just plug it for 1 second, that our festival, the Edinburgh Book Festival, is moving into the Futures Institute this year. And one of the great things there is it's not perfect, but the access is really great. And you've got these, and also because it used to be the hospital, there's these huge, wide, long corridors. And the sort of sense of history and story in that building is really, really powerful. But it is still, and I think about that all the time, you know, if you've not come up through a university background and you're looking at a building like that, there's still a huge question, is that for me? Am I allowed through those doors? And I think it's part of our job to open those doors and say, yes, it absolutely is. But do you, I mean, I suppose that's a question, you've been at so many festivals and things over time, Louise, do you feel like we are opening those doors as widely as we might be?
It's really difficult, isn't it? Because so many things are being cut. You know, there are things that I mentioned, the I Write Festival. Arts need funding, and we're constantly sort of defending the need for funding, aren't we? We're constantly saying things.
Endlessly
saying things like, oh, but people come to the city, they get a taxi, they pay for a room, they pay for meals, they'll go and see multiple things, they'll spend money within the city. It's really hard to quantify. All of that is true. You know, the culture sector makes money for everything else, you know, and somehow needs money put into it so that these ancillary things but not just for that.
No.
It needs it because it's great. You know, it's great. Culture makes our life better. Reading, looking at paintings, watching television, and even like the clothes that we wear, you know, it's art. Somebody designed these, somebody came up, you know, and allow us this element of self-expression that a lot of us enjoy.
Empathy and understanding,
you know,
and well-being, and that I think
all of these things, and we've always had that desire to make art and to make stories. You know, if we were all to go now to Chambers Street and go into the museum, we'd see the earliest artifacts are decorated because it's not entirely about utility. It's we need things of beauty, or we need ugly things, you know. I was listening to a program on Maria Callas before I came out, and she said, but my voice is not always beautiful. It's true, you know, sometimes it's not beautiful because the thing you're feeling is not beautiful, or the thing you're expressing is not beautiful, but it prompts other thoughts and makes the world better. So I guess I feel very worried about things slipping away, and I think once they've gone, it's really, really, really difficult to get them back. You know, to rebuild, I think, is difficult, and so we can't take it for granted. But and sure, people will always make stories and tell stories, but will it reach everybody? You know, the idea of libraries closing is really worrying. You know, and social centres, theatres. You know, at present in Glasgow, we're struggling to. The Citizens Theatre is being rebuilt. You know, we're struggling to fund that. Is that something else that we're going to let go? We're going to say that we don't need theatre. You know, we don't need books. We don't need poetry.
We're not going to do that.
Poets don't make any money. I said that to one of my friends. I was like, poets don't make any money. They need support. And he said, well, I just don't think we can afford poetry in Scotland.
Oh, God.
So.
Can we talk a little bit about Scottish literary tradition, though? Because there's a few kind of giants of Scottish literature that have influenced and informed both your sort of writing, but your kind of academic interests and things as well. And you and I are working on quite an interesting hog project at the moment.
Yeah, I was walking past, I walked past the Scott Monument on the way here, and I thought I should cross the road and go and look at a hog there, because Hog's face is on the Scott Monument as well.
Is he?
Yeah, it's there.
I didn't actually know that.
We should all go on our way home. So it's Hog's big birthday, isn't it?
It is, yes. 200 years this year since Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner was published, which lots of you will have read. It's such a fantastic book. It's a mix of the psychological and the supernatural, and it's a perfect Edinburgh novel. I can't think of the word har without thinking of that book. But it is just a really fascinating look at Calvinism and about the elect, and the characters are, I mean, you would do a better job of describing it than me, Louise.
I think it's a really perplexing book, and I showed. I've got my copy with me in my bag, and I showed it to Jenny, and it's completely covered in sticky notes and little writings on it. It's really hard to work everything out within this text. And
well, we've given you a slightly impossible task, though. So as part of this celebration of 200 years of Hog, which we will be announcing in a couple of weeks' time, we're doing kind of 5 different creative reinterpretations of the novel in different ways. And one of them is a bonkers project with Ben Harrison from Gridiron Theatre Company, who's going to take 6 little scenes from the key kind of pivotal scenes from the book. And we're working with a company called Ray Interactive to create a geolocated walking tour of the scenes. So you'll walk around the old town, and as you arrive in a place where one of these scenes has happened, you'll be able to watch on your phone a vignette, a little miniature screenplay, 6 of them, of these key scenes in the novel. And Louise has got the unbelievably difficult task of writing a sort of narrative that links them, that makes sense if you've not read the story before, or if you know it like the back of your hand, and linking those scenes together so that so you'll hear Louise in your headphones as you walk around, being our guide through the city for it. And it's going to be spectacular. I think it's such a...
I've decided, I'm hoping that we'll get someone else to record it.
Oh,
I'm
really?
thinking we should get somebody... I've got someone in mind,
okay.
but
I want maybe we can do two, because I want to listen to your version.
I also, you know, in the I want there to be options as well. Do you listen to the editor's account or do you listen to the sinner's account? Because they're not necessarily the same. And reading the book, because I've read the book so many times, and I'm reading it with this narrative in mind. There was something I hadn't really thought of, that connection between the justified sinner and Frankenstein. I think there's a real connection there. There's a moment when, for those of you that know the book, Robert Ringham pursues his brother George, and he's never away from George, and it's sort of magical. It's like a magical pursuit. And then in his account, the sinner says, "For all of that month, I kept to my room." And I thought it was rather like Frankenstein, whenever the creature does like something dreadful, Frankenstein is in a fugue or sleeping or unwell. And this idea that your other self is abroad in the world doing terrible things while you're in your bed is nightmarish, isn't it? You know,
properly horrifying.
It's like the worst blackout ever, you know. But I'm really excited about it.
Yeah.
And I think there's going to be a score as well. I went a couple of years ago, I can't remember, just towards the end of the lockdown, so I'm not exactly sure when that would be.
Speaking of fugues.
Adura Onashili did a great walking tour called Ghosts in Glasgow as well, where we used our phones, and it was really, really interesting, and people go at their own pace. And I think this will also be online, so people will be able to access it from, I don't know, New Zealand. And other places. And
I think to be able to put it within a kind of suite of different creative projects where different writers and theatre makers and musicians are looking at this text from all these different... It feels like a bit of a gift to be able to kind of unpack it in that way at this moment. Because I think that's part of the story, that when we're talking about the value of arts and culture as well, it's about talking about what has come before us as well. And it sort of astonishes me that novel, you know, like the kind of how well it's known and understood by some quarters and then not elsewhere at all. And there's parts of Europe where it's absolutely revered. And nobody in England's ever read it. Do you know, there's a strange sort of thing about Scottish literary tradition and where we speak about ourselves and where we don't. And
in France, you know, I think it was I can't remember who.
Andre Gide, who was a big fan.
And kind of brought it to popular attention. No, it's amazing. And I think there's been many, many attempts to do a screenplay for it, and nobody's quite managed. And I think I'm really glad that you got Stuart Lang doing another iteration, because I thought anyone that saw Paul Bright's Justified Sinner, which was on a few years ago, I think in Glasgow at the tramway, and then in Edinburgh up at the, I saw it in both places.
Queen's Hall.
So it was really fantastic. Embracing that idea of sit down, I'm going to tell you a true story. This is a true story, but you're that real gothic embracing of what's reality, what's not reality. And we've all been trying to make our own Brocken spectres as well, using car headlamps and all sorts of things to try and get that effect. Because that is part of my heart's desire, is to see a Brocken spectre. I would like that to happen before I die.
Oh, goodness. Did you see the Northern Lights last week?
I didn't see the Northern Lights, but apparently they may be tonight again, so I'm going to go out into the darkness with the bats in the park later on.
We're going to go for questions in a minute, but I was also thinking again about Justified Sinner this weekend, and this is a bit of a kind of left field one, so forgive me, but I did want to ask you. I was at the Dublin Book Festival this weekend and heard Marilyn Robinson speak, which was just amazing. She was just so kind of... It was the first time in a really long time that I'd heard somebody speak about religion in the way that she did. So her latest novel, she wrote The Gilead and all sorts, so she's just amazing. And she has written a new novel or a new book that looks at Genesis and goes back to the sort of story of Genesis and looks at it really literally in a strange way, but also kind of asks these really big questions about the role of religion in an age where we think we can solve everything and we have all the data and we have all the information. She sort of sees that as the ultimate kind of hubris. How much are we not looking at what is kind of behind the curtain that we're just squeezing out at the moment? And I just wanted to, having just spoken to or listened to another amazing literary hero, I wanted to see what you thought of that, Louise, and how in such a secular kind of society that we're in at the moment, and in this kind of sort of amazing monument to science and to thinking and to rationality and the Enlightenment and all of that, where do you sit on that kind of discussion about religion and the role of all of that, related to justified sin or not?
But I was brought up outside of any religious belief, and my dad was actually quite anti-religious, you know. So
my parents were the same.
Yeah, and didn't perceive it as a point for good. But, you know, working at the university, because we hold our events in the chapel, which is an interfaith space, I've got to know the chaplains there, Stuart McQuarrie, who sadly died very suddenly. And just what a fantastic... that there are people of faith that you can work with really well and who do a lot of good within the world and are sincere within their faith. And perhaps we don't meet these people often enough. So I think, again, working with people opens your mind, you know, and yes, I always enjoyed working with Stuart, and who was not above a swear. And that endeared us to him as well. But yeah, he was a fantastic person who'll be really, really, really missed and did so much. So yeah, so I don't go to church. I like a lot of the music though. You know, I do like a lot of the church music. I really enjoy a lot of masses. But yeah, when I go, I don't want a religious service, and you know, and all of that stuff. So, yeah.
Well, we'll go to questions in a minute, but I wanted to ask you about maybe another creative journey before we wrap up. Is there another creative journey you would like to share with us, or if there's something, or if not, if I could also prompt you one.
Yeah, well, I guess it sounds a little bit like I'm touting for business, and I don't have to tout for business because our program is oversubscribed. Actually, every year we have to either put people on the waiting list or turn people down who we would like to take. But I think the creative journey that I've had working with colleagues at the University of Glasgow has been absolutely huge. You know, and that idea that we discuss with students about craft. About, you know, that I have to read so much more widely than I would if I was left to my own devices. I'd just be reading Ruth Rendell, really, and stuff, and Chester Himes. So these, you know, things, these doors that are open. And I guess that idea of, you know, we're working in a place that's dedicated to interdisciplinary studies as well, working with people in other disciplines. So working with my friend Jude Barber, who's also a fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. We've been working together for over a decade, and Jude's an architect, and we're working together on a project just now called Who Owns the Clyde, which you think would be a simple answer to that question. Not at all. So on June the 7th, we're doing an event in the morning at Glasgow University in the Arc building, and in the afternoon, we're going over to the Clyde side to the Wall of Death, which even if you don't want to see us, you want to see the Wall of Death, which is a revelator, which is where you can motorcycle around the sides. So
will you be doing that yourself?
I will not be doing that myself, but it's a fantastic event space. So we're doing that as part of the Festival of Rejects and that is people that applied to be in GI and got turned down, which is us as well. And also, you know, I've had this fantastic creative journey with my friend and colleague Stuart McRae. Stuart is a composer, and now we've made, in a decade, we've made 4 operas together with the support of Scottish Opera, starting with a little one that was 15 minutes long, and then, you know, finally working up to full length. And that is going to have its 3rd new production. That's going to be on in Salzburg. It's premiering on Sunday. If any of you would like to jump on a plane and come with me to the home of Mozart and the home of, what's that other film? The Sound of Music.
That's so exciting. So what will your role consist of when you're there? Can you just go in glory in it, or do you have to do anything when you're there this weekend, or do you get to cut the ribbon, or how does it work?
When it ends and hopefully people are, wow, I have to run. And they always put you up in a circle or something, and somebody comes and gets you, and you have to run. And you have to get behind the stage, and then they take you, and you go up onto the stage, and you take a bow, and everybody looks and goes, who's that? Why have they brought the cleaner on? Never mind. Yeah, so it's very.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah,
what a great
I mean,
moment.
it's a journey that I never ever thought I would be on, and just sometimes, you know, I'd met Stuart years ago, and he had read my book, so when he got invited to make an opera, he asked if I would do the words. Writing opera libretto, oh my goodness. You don't get many words, let's just say that.
Well, it was in my mind when we were about the, you know, the Justified Sinner project. It's like, it's the skill of being able to, you know, really refine and really cut back and write in that such a talk and a specific, it is a very similar discipline, isn't it?
Yeah.
To that?
You're like, how many minutes?
Scripting.
How many minutes do I have? And you also have to think about the form of the words. So like a long multi-syllable word can be really fast, and can go on forever. So you have to really, you know, and not lead to the music, not be too rhythmic, not be too rhymey. Think about what the scene is at that point, but also you're making the characters, making the shape of the story, which Stuart is a great storyteller. So we do, you know, a lot of those discussions, and discussions about politics, discussions about faith, you know, really thinking about character as well and how people act.
It sounds much more complicated than the spreadsheets you say you can't do.
It's a different skill, isn't it? It's different bits of the brain.
Okay, I've already hogged too much of the time. We've still got 10 or 15 minutes left for some questions from you folks. Oh, hands up straight away. There's one here and one down in the front. There's a mic right behind you.
Thanks so much to both of you. That was a really great discussion. I have a question for you both, if that's okay. So I run Boom Saloon, which is a global movement to democratise creativity for good. And we use media and publishing to try and shape a better future for everyone. And I'm really, really proud to do that from Scotland. But also to further conversation that's been started, I do feel increasingly desperate about our cultural and creative landscape at the moment. And I don't want to flog a dead horse because I have a lot of the same discussions around this, and I imagine a lot of people in the room will probably be on the same page. So we do a lot of solutions journalism, and I wanted to task both of you with that and ask, is there anywhere in the world that you feel is really successfully supporting their creative industries and reaping the benefits of that? And what would you like to see Scotland learn from that?
Well, sorry, I'm going to let you go first.
You go first.
No, I mean, I've been talking a lot to Culture Ireland of late. They've just got the data in for their first round of universal basic income trials. That's where I personally would go. I mean, I think it's huge, and the fact that they actually now have data to support that rebut some of the economic arguments against UBI, which I think will hopefully be able to play a role in these discussions going forward. But on a more kind of literature-focused sort of way, Ireland has been supporting its literature in a really clear, sustained way for decades. And then we all go, well, why do they keep winning the Booker Prize? And how come they've got millions of writers? And it's consistency, do you know? But yeah, I think that, otherwise Norway, I think, do an amazing job of supporting the arts and literature. It's not without complication, but yeah, I think that's the thing. I think there are places out there. I do think, though, that we're stuck in this terrible political short-termism about things, and it is a bit of a hobby, so I'll not go into it too much, but just, you maybe even people in the room had this as well, but over the last 6 months, every single organisation of scale in Scotland were going through the ringer of applying for multi-year funding through Creative Scotland. And I used to work for Creative Scotland, and I have a huge amount of sympathy for the challenge there. However, putting the entire cultural sector through that process at the same time, the number of times I just wanted to bang my head off the wall, the amount of lost time, the work that we're not making, the way that we're not supporting it. It just seems there's so many bits of the system that are not working properly at the moment. And I would like us to see just a bit more kind of ambition and creativity about saying we have to do things quite differently, not just by the edges, but quite differently. I don't know how optimistic I am about whether the next government will do that or not. Yeah. So I think there's so much to do there, and I don't think that's without. There are models, I think, that, but some of them are not that complicated. You know. If that helps.
Yeah, I really endorse what Jenny's saying. Really. I feel that I have to be optimistic, because if I'm not, then I just stop. So while seeing the horrible difficulties, I wonder about the work that's not getting made.
Yeah.
The people that aren't managing to make work, people that are leaving. So yeah, but I have to be optimistic. I have to believe that work will continue and that work can change, and that the new generation keep on pushing and pushing and pushing. I had an Arts Council, a Scottish Arts Council grant when I was writing my very first book. I got a grant of £6,000. I've never had a grant since, because I haven't needed to have a grant, but that money, it enabled me to finish. And it was just so, it enabled me to finish, and it also gave me this huge feeling of obligation that I wanted to finish because people had supported me. Yeah. And if if somebody else could have got that funding, so there was that idea that not simply, oh, thank you, entitlement. Yeah. No, thank you, and I'm gonna show that this works. But I know that other work that I've done has had lots of support in other ways. Translators have been paid, all sorts of things that sometimes you're not aware of. Where is doing it well? I always feel when I go to Germany that the arts look well funded there, and I've done quite a few residencies in Germany, and I don't know the ins and outs of it, but Canada seems to do a lot of good stuff as well. So.
I was also I think there's a question of resilience, and we mentioned IWrite earlier, and I think that was a case in point of where lots of places are one funding application away from, and there wasn't any, whereas previously perhaps, there is that element, it's not a lottery, but there was always, or sometimes there would be a plan B, there'd be another way of doing things. Yeah. You could hold out until the next application, but I think that's been through COVID and other things as well, that's just been eroded. So when things don't happen, they really don't happen. And that's where the real risk, I think, comes in. And places like Birmingham have just wiped out their entire cultural infrastructure, and yet we're going, oh, it'll be fine.
What does that?
Yeah,
and I know we've got another
and I generally am, but.
Question, but I think also when we talk about subsidies in the arts are subsidised to a great extent by artists themselves. And when I think of IWrite, I know the librarians at the Mitchell, and they worked overtime, endless overtime, to support this. So a lot of broken hearts.
Yeah, that's a question. Yeah.
Thank you both for such a wonderful conversation. And Jenny, you at least know me by sight. You know how much the Edinburgh International Book Festival means to me. And I just want to plug it for a second before I ask my question. It is such an outlet for people who have disabilities, visible or otherwise, to have a place to be. And I think that's what these spaces provide. But the nub of my question is this: how do we shift, and this is where I'll have a bit of a moan, how do we shift the political narrative from people of diverse groups being the problem as opposed to being part of the solution? Because people with disabilities and otherwise are made out to be the problem, and the incoming Labour government, UK government, are doing more of that day by day, and it frustrates me. So I just want to thank you both, because it's people like you that give me hope that not everybody shares that view, but that's what people like me are battling all the time. So it was more a comment than a question, but how can we shift the narrative to help us all work together to find solutions and not make one group out to be the problem or another minority to be the problem? We seem to be othering people all the time, and it frightens me, and it's dangerous.
Yeah, I think visibility is very important, isn't it? And discussion and interaction. And when I've worked with writers with various disabilities, the amount of talent and verve and experience, and I think writing and work by people with disabilities can do a huge amount to just open those doors and open the experiential doors as well. And yeah, just we need to have those doors opened, really.
And listening, I think, as well.
Yeah.
We've just had a chap join our board who is deaf. He works within Scottish Government, and I'm learning so much from him contributing to discussions, not just on access, but on all kinds of things. And I think it's people being in the conversation and influencing the decision making as well, and it's such a critical part of things. And also us sort of taking quite seriously what adjustments you do need to make to do everything a bit differently, to include the, voices of folks who need other things to be able to fully participate, and having to change our own way of working. And he's quite explicit, he wants, by the time he's sort of concluded on the board, whenever that might be, that it should be even better for people who share his challenges to come to the festival, and he's put that as a challenge to us. And yeah, I'm up for that, because we've not got everything right yet. But yeah, trying to learn as much as possible.
I also think we should have a level of outrage about some of the things that are happening as well. So the scandal around carers allowance and people who have gone tiny, a penny, a pound, small amounts of money, who are now having to pay back thousands and thousands and thousands. Yeah. It's utterly shameful. So I think a level of anger and outrage is appropriate.
I think we've got time for one more, if there's another question.
Don't let us end on anger and outrage.
Yeah.
Hi there. Thank you both for the conversation. It's been so insightful. My question's for you, Louise. I was just wondering, how do you have a sort of creative process, when you sit down to write, and has that changed throughout the years?
I think, it's a good question, because I think it changes with different projects sometimes, but it's mainly just sitting down and doing it. And when you talk about what would you gift writers, the library card, going to the library and reading and reading and reading. It's amazing sometimes you say to someone, what do you like to read? You want to be a writer, what do you like to read? Oh, I don't really read that much. You're like, well, you have to read. But also just to sit at the desk. But I think what changes is where my desk is. So I work a lot at home, but I'll work in various, sometimes at the desk, sometimes at the window, and sometimes in the library. I'm a real fan of the Mitchell Library, and they've got a great reading room there. So I think getting outside is really important, because if you're working on your own, you can do that thing where you just you don't go out. So you mustn't stay indoors for 3 days. That's really unhealthy. So yeah, but I think my main process is just treating it like a job, and whether you feel it or not, you have to sit down and do it. And some days you come up with very, very little, and some days you come up with more, and to avoid despair, really, because there's days when your work doesn't work and you can feel really low about it, but you have to remember that there's going to be another day tomorrow, and your work will hopefully be better tomorrow. So yeah, so that's where the optimism comes in. That because I guess I've been doing this for 20 years now, and I don't think it necessarily gets any easier. But what is easier is that you know you've hit bumps before, and that you managed to get over the bump before, and just to keep on going.
But what you've achieved already, Louise, is just phenomenal. And I'll be so kind of rooting at this, thinking of you on that stage in Salzburg receiving all the accolades. That's a really lovely, well-deserved thing.
With everybody saying, who's that woman?
They want to be like, oh, it's the writer.
It's very nerve-wracking because the
librettist.
The librettist, because the etiquette is that the librettist goes on before the composer. So there's a moment when you just have to cross the stage on your own and you can't see anything. And there are all these beautiful, beautiful people in costume that you have to go and join. The soprano comes and gets you and welcomes you in, and you just have to do it solo. And then Stuart comes on, and you've got your pal again. So it's
We'll enjoy every minute of it, Louise. It's been an absolute
thank
pleasure
you.
Speaking to you tonight. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much, and thanks for coming. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you to the staff and the team here at the RSE. Thank you so much for having us, and thanks so much for giving up your evening. We will release you back into the sunshine, but please check out the remaining bit of the programme and get a copy of the fabulous To the Dogs, available in shops now.
And apparently the Aurora may be back with us this evening, so that would be brilliant. That would be so brilliant.
Thank you,
Thank
Louise.
you. Thanks, everybody.